A troubled past, a shattered marriage, and a death that shook the literary world. Richard Klinkhamer's life read like a thriller. But the true horror was yet to unfold. What drives a man to murder his wife, and then craft a chilling story about it? This is the dark tale of a writer who blurred the lines between fiction and reality, leaving behind a trail of questions that may never be answered. Was it a crime of passion or something much more sinister? Imagine a scene straight out of a Hitchcock thriller, a suspenseful tale with dark twists and chilling undertones. This is the true story of Richard Klinkhamer, a Dutch novelist who, in 1991, killed his wife in a fit of drunken rage. His action seemed less like a calculated murder, and more like the tragic outburst of a man haunted by his own troubled past. Yet, what happened next showed Klinkhamer's unsettling mix of arrogance and boldness. After burying his wife in the garden, he tried to hide any trace of her body, covering it with compost to mask the smell. While most might lie low after such a crime, Klinkhamer took a different route. Instead, he began working on a book, a mix of memoir, fiction, and confession. It wasn't published until 2007, but early drafts had been shopped around in the 1990s, each page hinting at his guilt in darkly disturbing ways. In the book, Klinkhamer described 7 possible ways he might have killed his wife, each scenario darker than the last. His final chilling twist? In a particularly macabre chapter, he describes his wife's body being chopped up, ground like meat, and fed to pigeons. This dark, twisted memoir wasn't just a tale, it was a taunt, a piece of Klinkhamer's own real-life horror story, daring to see the light. On a cold Wednesday, January 30th, 1991, Richard Klinkhamer bludgeoned his wife, Hannelore, to death with an iron bar. The crime was brutal and impulsive, yet what followed was even more chilling. For nearly a decade, Richard lived in the same house, tending to a garden that hid a dark secret, Hannelore's body buried beneath the garden shed. As years passed, his audacity only grew. Early drafts of his book, Woensdag Gehaktdag, circulated among crime writers, gaining underground notoriety. The original premise was a twisted mix of fiction and reality, but when the truth about his crime surfaced, the book evolved. He rewrote parts of it while in prison, adding passages of unexpected sensitivity and regret, though the provocative title remained a haunting reminder of his crime. This wasn't just a crime story, it was a journey into the mind of a killer. Klinkhamer dared to explore a place where few authors have ever ventured, writing about murder from the unique perspective of the perpetrator. It's a grim reminder that sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction. For nearly 10 years, Richard lived with his guilt, carrying on as if nothing had happened, even as his wife's remains lay just a few steps away. In the quiet hamlet where Richard Klinkhamer lived, whispers began to spread. Neighbors couldn't help but notice his peculiar behavior and started to voice their suspicions. Many were convinced he had killed his wife, Hannelore. Yet, in a strange twist, they continued to greet him with polite smiles, maintaining a facade of friendliness even as their doubts grew. The rumors took a darker turn when prank calls began. Anonymous voices taunted Klinkhamer, accusing him of murder, claiming they knew his secret. Stories swirled through the town, each one more grotesque than the last. Some speculated he had fed Hannelore into a meat grinder, hiding the remains in one of his eerie garden sculptures, macabre art he'd crafted himself. When police eventually searched his home, the scene seemed like something out of a crime novel. They confiscated a meat grinder, meat hooks, and butcher knives, items that seemed to validate the town's grim suspicions. But despite their efforts, the police found nothing. Even cadaver dogs, trained to detect death, failed to uncover the carefully hidden truth. For years, Klinkhamer remained their prime suspect. His eerie calm only fueled the mystery. Yet, without evidence, the case went cold. Detectives questioned Richard Klinkhamer repeatedly about his wife Hannelore's disappearance, but he denied knowing anything. The discovery of her bicycle, neatly propped up against a wall at Winchendon train station, painted a different picture. It suggested she might have left on her own, perhaps falling victim to a random killer. But witnesses soon came forward, revealing they had seen Richard placing the bike there himself, shattering that illusion. For 9 long years, Richard lived a strange double life. On one hand, he was the husband of a missing woman. On the other, he cultivated a reputation as a daring writer who seemed to toy with the truth. He pitched his book, Woensdag Gehaktdag, to publishers, weaving cryptic details into both his stories and casual conversations. In one passage, Richard chillingly wrote, "My wife has disappeared. I am not distraught because I have killed her myself, they say." If the rumors are to be believed, it's almost certain that this ex-legionnaire, ex-hotelier, and ex-meat dealer has had a hand in her disappearance. It was a game to him, a dangerous balancing act between suspicion and denial. With each sly reference, Richard blurred the lines between fiction and reality, feeding the mystery and keeping everyone guessing. For nearly a decade he remained free, daring the world to uncover the truth. Richard Klinkhamer was born in 1937 and spent his early years in Austria during World War II, living with relatives. After the war, he returned to Amsterdam, speaking with an Austrian accent that made him an easy target for bullies. His troubled childhood was marked by instability, bouncing between foster homes after his mother abandoned him. Perhaps it was this search for love and belonging that shaped the man he would become. Struggling to fit in, Richard grew up feeling like an outsider. For a time he worked as a butcher, but mounting gambling debts forced him to flee. He joined the French Foreign Legion, shipping off to Algeria, a decision he later regretted deeply. The harsh life of the Legion inspired his first novel, Obedient as a Dog, 1983, which earned him critical acclaim. But Richard's love for spinning tales blurred the line between fact and fiction. He once claimed he killed 3 Algerian terrorists, only to later admit it was a lie. This need to exaggerate and mystify became a defining part of his personality. Richard seemed to thrive on keeping people guessing about what was real. After 3 years, he deserted the Legion and returned to Amsterdam, resuming work as a butcher. In 1962, he married and had 2 sons, but the marriage didn't last. By the early 1970s, he met Hannelore, or Hanny, who would become his second wife. As the 1970s ended, Richard began writing short stories for magazines, dipping his toes into the literary world. But beneath his creative success and tough guy persona, there lingered a darkness, a part of him that would one day change everything. After publishing Obedient as a Dog, Richard Klinkhamer enjoyed moderate literary success. But things took a dark turn after the 1987 financial crash, when bad investments left him in ruins. His drinking spiraled out of control and his wife, Hannelore, bore the brunt of his rage. Their once peaceful home became a battleground, with Hannelore enduring Richard's violent outbursts, a heartbreaking reality for any victim of domestic abuse. On a cold winter's night in 1991, a chilling scream shattered the quiet countryside. Neighbors heard a woman's cry, but the night soon fell silent again. Inside the Klinkhamer home, tensions had reached a breaking point. Fed up with her husband's drinking and violence, Hannelore packed his bags and told him to leave. But to Richard, this was more than a fight. It was a betrayal that reopened the wounds of his troubled past. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a crowbar and struck her, ending her life in a brutal, impulsive act. Panicking, Richard buried Hannelore in a shallow grave beneath their garden shed, covering her body with concrete and clay. For 6 years he lived in the same house, writing drafts of a novel titled Wednesday Mince Day, a chilling story eerily similar to his crime. Publishers rejected the manuscript, calling it too grotesque. One even suspected Richard was using the book to revel in his crime and profit from it. Despite this, Richard rewrote parts of the story, eventually publishing a novel titled Ransom, which sold modestly. Behind his facade of a struggling writer, Richard carried a dark secret, one that would stay buried, just like Hannelore, until the truth finally surfaced. In 1997, Richard Klinkhamer sold his house in Gansdijk and moved back to Amsterdam, settling in the Jordan district with a new girlfriend and a fresh start. But the dark secret he left behind wouldn't stay buried forever. The modest house he sold changed hands a few times. In January 2000, the latest owner decided to renovate the garden, tearing down the old shed and digging up the soil. While working on the redesign, a construction worker operating a digger made a shocking discovery: a human skull embedded in a block of clay. The police were called, and forensic experts soon unearthed the skeleton. Dental records confirmed what many had long suspected: it was Hannelore. The truth was out, and Klinkhamer's years of hiding were over. News of the discovery spread quickly, and the public was horrified to learn about his unpublished novel, Wednesday Mince Day, which eerily mirrored the crime. The press had a field day with headlines like "Murder," he wrote in The Lying Dutchman. But Klinkhamer remained unapologetic, coldly telling reporters, "The only person I need to answer to is no longer with us." Adding a heartbreaking twist to the story, it was revealed during the trial that Hannelore's own mother had been murdered by her father years earlier. Both mother and daughter had met tragic ends at the hands of the men they trusted. A chilling, eerie parallel that left many shaken. Klinkhamer's actions not only ended Hannelore's life, but also left a dark stain on the lives of those who knew her. It's a haunting reminder of how deep the scars of betrayal can go. In September 2000, Richard Klinkhamer was sentenced to 7 years for manslaughter. First-degree murder couldn't be proven, but the facts were still chilling. He had brutally beaten his wife Hannelore with an iron bar, hidden her body, and for nearly a decade played a cruel game of deception. While Hannelore's loved ones agonized over her disappearance, Klinkhamer lived freely, even writing a book that eerily mirrored his crime. During his sentence, part of his time was spent working in a retirement home washing dishes. But even behind bars, Klinkhamer showed no remorse, not to the court, not to Hannelore's family, and not to the world. Instead, he seemed to thrive on the notoriety, becoming infamous as the writer who killed his wife, and turned the tragedy into a story. The tale of Richard Klinkhamer is both horrifying and tragic. A man consumed by his own darkness, who turned his wife's death into a twisted narrative. The decision to kill may have been a moment of madness, but his years of lies, and his brazen arrogance, sealed his fate. In January 2016, at the age of 78, Klinkhamer ended his life with a self-inflicted gunshot, leaving behind a legacy of pain and unanswered questions. His story is a stark reminder of how far some will go to manipulate the truth, and how their actions leave scars that never truly heal.